Ted McClelland is a terrific writer for the Chicago Magazine. He writes on a variety of subjects, politics included, and demographics, I guess. This caught my eye. Chicago is the most progressive city in the nation, perhaps, but most definitely, Illinois is the most progressive state in the Union, with maybe the most beautiful state song. Here's former Governor Pat Quinn.
By thy rivers gently flowing, Illinois, Illinois,
Irish tenor.
O'er thy prairies verdant growing, Illinois, Illinois.
It's such a beautiful song that a lot of bands have done their own versions of that song. Before we get to Ted.
From Abe Lincoln to George Ryan, things got worse in Illinois. It's enough to make you curse in Illinois, Illinois. North and south, east and west, things are really such a mess. Governors make license plates in Illinois, Illinois. Governors make license plates in Illinois.
That's just a beautiful, beautiful version. Well, certainly, Illinois has become the most progressive state in the Union, but doesn't it seem counterintuitive? I mean, look at the states that neighbor us. Makes no sense. Well, actually, it does. Why has a Midwestern state in which, for most of its history, it's defined moderation in politics, Jim Edgar, others, Jim Thompson, it's taken the crown of progressivism from New York, California, Massachusetts, even Vermont? Well, Ted would argue that Illinois is so progressive because it's a Midwestern state. Let's start there with Ted McClelland from the Chicago Magazine. Ted, please explain this. I think it involves the term clustering.
Right, you're right. There was a book, I guess a political theory called The Big Sort, that people over the last 30 years have sort of, as you said, been clustering in like-minded enclaves. And, Chicago, being surrounded by so much conservative territory, if you're a young person, maybe a gay person, an artistic person, you want to get out of your small town, the closest place to go is Chicago. So, maybe some of the conservative Chicagoans are moving to Florida, but a lot of the liberal small-town Midwesterners, I think, are moving to Chicago. And I kind of use an example in there of a very ardent John Branson volunteer I met in Logan Square, and he described himself as a queer artist from a small town in Ohio. So if you're a queer artist, a small town in Ohio might not be a very friendly place, but Chicago might be something different. And really, those were the people who put Brandon Johnson in the mayor's office. I mean,
yeah, and maybe kept Governor Pritzker in office too. And as you wrote, Pritzker calls us an oasis in the Midwest.
Right.
And essentially, as you elaborated, we've become an oasis for young, educated Midwesterners who moved here to, as you wrote, get the hell out of conservative small towns in Wisconsin, Indiana, Iowa, and Missouri.
Right. Well, he calls us an oasis for reproductive rights, and he has before called Illinois the most progressive state in the nation on reproductive rights. And, there may be that pressure of the fact that, we're surrounded by almost every state surrounding us has severely restricted abortion rights. So, as you say, as the liberal people leave, those states become more conservative, and Illinois becomes more progressive. So, Illinois may feel pressure to provide that service that nobody else is doing in the Midwest.
Well, also being so progressive city in a progressive state, there's a business model there too, which is being replicated, as you wrote, in Peoria of all places.
Right. Yeah. I read an article in the New York Times about I think it was, I don't know if it was this queer woman, this trans woman had moved to Peoria, and it's an extremely affordable place, as most of downstate Illinois is, but at the same time, it's in a blue state. And, I was just, somebody posted my article on Reddit, and I was reading some of the comments from people who moved from other states. Somebody talking about living on the Illinois side of the Mississippi River across from St. Louis, and how different it feels just from being a few miles away in St. Louis, the protections we have for abortions, for LGBTQ residents, the more restrictive on gun control. So I wanted to call the article "Blue Island, Illinois."
Well, as you explain, if the liberal oases have become more liberal and the conservative oases have become more conservative, and this is kind of a stunning statistic, which is in your article, which you should read, everybody, at the Chicago Magazine. In 1976, less than a quarter of Americans lived in places where the presidential election was a landslide. By 2004, nearly half of all voters lived in landslide counties, and I would imagine it's even worse now, almost 20 years later. But how does that bode for the future of our representative republic overall?
Well, I think you can even see that in Illinois. You see counties in say, southeastern Illinois where Trump got 80% of the vote. And then what does he get in Cook County? Like, Biden must have gotten 75% of the vote. But, who could have imagined this in Illinois in the 80s and the 90s when we had, 26 consecutive years of Republican governors? Who can even imagine a Republican being elected governor of Illinois now? Because anyone they would nominate, as we saw with Darren Bailey, would be far too conservative for the Chicago area.
Because all the young liberal people, educated people, have moved to Chicago, or at least Illinois.
Right.
It's now easier to ban abortion in states where all the young liberal voters have moved away, but it's easier to protect it in the state where they've all moved. Right, exactly. So, we're going in a completely different direction from the rest of the Midwest. And I think one point I made, and I'd made that in a previous article, is I wondered if this had something to do with Trump winning the presidency, because if all these young liberals had stayed in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, Clinton might have won there. Well, the young, educated, liberal population, they certainly stimulate the economy as opposed to the older, more rural, homogenous populations that are left surrounding us. So I guess as far as a business model, well done, Illinois. And that's why so many of these, and we have an article about this coming in the September issue about why so many of these suburban office parks are moving into the city, like Motorola and McDonald's. They want to take advantage of that young, educated population. Ted, before I let you go, are you going tonight, tomorrow, and Sunday to Lollapalooza, or just one night? No, I don't think I've ever been to Lollapalooza. How many nights are you going? I can't this year, unfortunately, doctor's orders, but otherwise I'd be there all 4 days. You know that. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, what's your all-time favorite Lollapalooza act? Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. Oh, really? Yeah, I think mine was Big Spiderbeck. I saw him there. Do you know? I actually visited his hometown, his house in Davenport, Iowa. I stopped by. There's a little plaque on the front of the house. Is he? And then you could have crossed the river and visited Louis Belson's, and I think he was from Moline. I believe you're right, and that's right after I stopped in Dixon and looked at Ronald Reagan's boyhood home. Really? Yeah. Well, when I went to Mason City, Iowa, I visited the home of the Music Man. So I have not been to Herbert Hoover's hometown. Have you been to Herbert Hoover's hometown in Iowa? No, I haven't. Our outdated musical references are all over the Midwest. All right. Well, thanks, Ted. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend, sir.